Kia ora and welcome. I'm Clarissa Dunn, host of Music Alive on RNZ Concert. It's fantastic to have you here with this roundtable discussion on Tristan and Isolde. I have two fantastic people with me at this table. Let's call it our Knights of the Round Table discussion. We have Frances Moore, who is currently the participation manager with New Zealand Opera. She was formerly with the Auckland Philharmonia as their artistic coordinator. She's an all-round artistic legend, a director, educator, writer, just a wonderful creative person. So I'm looking forward to hearing her thoughts on this incredible opera. And Emeritus Professor Heath Lees, who is also a multi-talented man, a music educator, the author of 4 CDs on Wagner's music, which he tells me never brought in any money, and also a broadcaster. Many of our listeners might recognise your voice when you kick off.
Those were the days.
Yeah, it's still beautiful. So we're here to chat about this opera, and I was wondering about where Tristan comes in relation to the ring cycle, which many people may be more familiar with than Tristan and Isolde. He was writing on the two at a similar time.
Yes, yeah, he started the ring. By the time he got to Dresden, he began on to work on the ring. Remember, he's writing the book, the words, the lyrics, and before that he's getting to the music. And as he was writing the words, he was sketching bits of the music in the margins of the manuscript. There's a bit in the Valkyrie where part of the words are written down in the paper, and alongside there are 5 lines and 4 spaces and a treble clef, and there's a bit that goes da-dum, da-dum, dum. That's what happened.
Just incidentally.
I know.
In the margins.
But he used to say that that's the way, if you write the words generate the music. And then the music generates the rest of the words. And the whole thing is a kind of circular process.
But he kind of started in the, because he started his ring cycle in the middle of it, really, didn't he?
Yeah, he got as far as Siegfried, the third of the 4 operas.
And then he kind of put that aside and kind of discovered
and
Tristan.
I think with doing that, he opened the gate.
Yeah.
And Tristan and Isolde flooded in through.
Yeah.
So the impetus was possibly what was going on in his personal life?
Oh, sure.
The emotional impetus?
Yeah, also what was going on in his professional life, in the sense of how powerful and important is music, and what kind of music do I want to write? And Tristan and Isolde answered these questions for him, but only after he had written it, not before.
Oh, I think it was also like a with Siegfried and kind of the beginnings of that cycle of kind of operas. That was such a radically modern and untested and certainly uncommercial project. You know, like if you even think about the beginnings of Bayreuth, and his initial plan for that house was for there to be 3 performances, and then he'd burn the whole thing down. So
extravagant.
With works like Tristan, I think he was also trying to kind of come up with a more commercial, a more kind of a work that would perhaps be more accessible for...
I'm sure you're right, but I think it got away from him.
I'm trying to think how it might have been.
Well, the orchestra's not huge. It's kind of a Beethoven orchestra with a couple of horns in. And the idea is simply a love story, really. If you look at Wikipedia, for example, Tristan and Isolde, they will summarise the story in 51 words. I've counted them.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, it's as easy as that. I mean, it's not, you don't go to it for the story. You go to it for the emotional crisis that comes there, and the way that music and the words come together. And he was trying to work out all that at the time.
Yeah.
He was also being funded around this time. There was a bit more money sloshing around that he
there was.
A little more secure.
And Lohengrin, which was going the rounds at the time, was bringing in some money for him. Not much, but enough to make life bearable.
What does it take to perform this music? This is a marathon to sing, let alone conduct, and perform in the pit. You must have had interesting conversations with singers around the world about how you bring this music to life? What's the toll on an individual?
It's very demanding. I don't think he realised how much of the exacting he was being on his singers until the end. The two who sang Tristan and Isolde, first of all, Malvina and Ludwig Karelsfeld von Schnorr. Ludwig von Schnorr Karelsfeld.
This was a husband and wife.
Husband and wife team, yes, which is an amazing thing, really. But the horrible thing is that Ludwig caught a cold during the first performance of Tristan, and the cold developed, as colds did in those days, into something very life-threatening, and he died within 3 days of the end of the performance. And it gave Tristan and Isolde a terrible reputation.
Right, it's being the opera that kills people.
Yeah, exactly, yes. And it's not the only instance of people who were in the midst of a performance. Some of the orchestral players died during it. And I think it has to do with the fact that there were lots of demands put on these people. And although Wagner, as you said there, Francis, although he kept on thinking this was going to be a kind of refreshing rest cure sort of opera, it never stayed like that at all. And it became just as difficult and as demanding as all the others, really. But then it wasn't 4 operas of the Ring. I mean, things are so much demanding there.
Well, yeah, I think, you know, nowadays you have singers that just specialise in singing this type of repertoire because it's such a specific skill, and you required, you know, you really just require a specific anatomy in order to be able to maintain that sound for the hours that you are. It also means that the rehearsal schedule needs to accommodate like sufficient rest time. So it is a really big undertaking. And I think, you know, we talked about the fact that we think the only performance of Tristan and Isolde in terms of kind of the full thing in New Zealand was actually 10 years ago, also by Auckland Phil. Because it is really challenging to actually put up. So we're so lucky to have the extraordinary singers that we'll have tonight. You know, people like Simon O'Neill, who's obviously, you know, one of the preeminent kind of Wagnerian tenors on the planet, kind of from Aotearoa, which is beautiful. We have Ricardo da Merbeth, who's kind of singing our Isolde, and yeah, you can't just pluck these singers from anywhere. You really need the proper ones.
I guess it's a big investment for them too, spending years learning these roles. I mean, the sheer memorization is a feat unto itself, let alone singing this music into your body so that you can cope with that extraordinary physical demand.
Yeah. And for the orchestra too, like, you know, I'm pleased to say we don't really often have players drop dead anymore.
No.
And it is that sense that the profession has shifted, obviously, these days. So the players are capable of the kind of marathon efforts. But I'm sure all of them will tell you that they literally have some kind of fitness regime going on just to get through it. The sense of, how you rehearse it becomes, you really need to be really careful about how you plan that.
So talk a bit more about setting this opera not as a fully staged piece, but as an opera in concert. I think that's how we're describing it.
Yeah. It's kind of like an ambiguous thing in opera in concert because it's not one thing or another. And I think, as with any good bit of theatre or good bit of opera, you're just there to tell the story, and it's a beautiful story. And so I suppose I'd really see my job is kind of not getting in the way, but just making sure that what is happening is absolutely necessary and required to most succinctly tell the story for an opera in concert. You know, you don't have the luxury of props, you don't have costume, you don't have set pieces. And I don't think you need it.
So you're not having any of that?
We have a few things. There are some things you desperately need. You need a sword. You need something to stab someone with. You need, you know, a poison, a potion. But that sense of, kind of just being there to kind of help guide the singers, and that also kind of coming and knowing that these singers that we have, which we're so lucky to have, they've all sung these roles many times before. They become the experts in the room. And it's really going, how do we find the most succinct way of telling this story in this, in the Auckland Town Hall. And it's a gift of a space anyway. Like you were saying before we were on camera that a lot of the music reminds you of water and kind of being at sea. And I feel like the Town Hall kind of could feel like the inside of a boat, with all that kind of wooden architecture built in. The balconies, it feels
so
that sense of like, how can we use the space to kind of help us tell the story?
I definitely get that feeling from the music, where as if you were in the ocean swimming, and then the boundaries of your body somehow disappear into the ocean. You become part
Subsumed.
of the universal, part of everything around
The
you.
music helps you to change the emotion as well. There's a bit right at the start where you mentioned the seaman at the start. When he's da-dee, da-da-da-dee, pom, 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 pom. And the first phrase is not in a proper key at all.
Yeah.
It's unsettling.
Yeah.
It's meant to be unsettling. But the second phrase is completely in Kurvanal's home key. Yum, pom, 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 pom. Because the seaman's going home.
Yeah.
And this is him singing. This is terrific. I'm looking forward to that. And then she says, Isolde says to Brangeni,
because she thinks he's mocking her.
He is mocking her.
Yeah.
And she says to Brangeni, where are we? And she goes to the porthole or the side, I don't know, wherever, and she comes back and says, Cornwall's green and pleasant land. And she goes, pa-dum, ta-dum, dum, pa-pa-pa-pom, pom, 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 which is what the seaman has already been singing. and you sit there in the audience and you think, gee, I think I know that. Of course you know it, because he's let you hear it before. This is his secret, over and over again. Bits of what you listen to, you do know it. He's implanted it. And this is what makes it such a kind of
captivating.
Yes, it draws you into the music. All the people who have talked about the effect of Wagner's music on them have said it was like their own music. I thought that when it happened to me, and I thought I was the only one it happened to. And then when I read that book with 107 accounts of it, just about all of them said the same thing. They thought it was their music. And it's because Wagner builds it in advance, where you don't kind of notice it. But once it comes out in the proper dramatic moment, you think, that's where it fits. And this is something that you're being drawn into because of that. You're helping to make the music.
That's nice. That's a nice feeling for you to take into the directing, isn't it? That that it's more than just the cast and the instrumentalist and the pit and the conductor, but we're all in the room
recognizing it together
as part of it.
Yeah. Well, and I mean, that's one of the things I love most about our operas and concert is they are so beautifully intimate. That sense that the audience is so close to the singers and so close to the orchestra, and we all kind of end up in communion with each other for these beautiful 6 hours. It's such a treat.
So many people wanted to support his genius, didn't they? That maybe they turned a blind eye to the way he was as a human being.
I think it's an interesting question that as kind of interpretive artists we have to grapple with all the time, in terms of our responsibilities to not turn a blind eye or to know, but also to kind of, it's like how we live with that complexity in our work and how we live with that complexity and kind of and how we create work.
And what does that look like in our modern day and age? Is that having conversations about it? Educating people? I
think partly it's being honest about it and kind of going, this was an aspect of the creator. And there are many, many artists who have formed our musical canons and who fill our galleries and who wrote out, the plays we all know, where when we look at them as a complete person, who was it that said, Wagner was just a bit of a shit? Was it Auden?
That was Tristan Auden.
Yeah. And I think it's right to kind of acknowledge that. But then I also think that it's that sense of how do we hold that complexity in a rehearsal room? How do we hold that complexity in performance?
Hard.
Yes.
And there's no absolute answer for it. And there will never be. It's just something that we almost kind of wake up every day and kind of go, this is the work that we're doing.
And yet there's something about a work like this which makes the stature of your daily life into something different.
Yeah. I think that's
It's the universal of it, isn't it? That the way that he deals with these extraordinary human themes.
It seems to me that if the people who come to this performance and who are affected by it, and I think all of them who come will be affected in some way or other by it, their life grows after they've left the theatre and they go out into their daily lives. And they take bits of it with them. I can't explain it, but I think it makes them different people.
I think it
funny.
does. It does kind of. It's it's ironic, isn't it, that like as a human being he was awful, and yet the art speaks somehow to our humanity and to the human existence, and to kind of the very real kind of feelings we have. Like if we talk about Tristan and it's an opera that is consumed by the idea of what love is, and that's pertinent for all of us, I think. And like you say, it kind of, you listen to it and it makes you go, as a young man, I want that. Like I want that all-consuming passion. We can all remember that. I mean, I think for Wagner does longing particularly well, doesn't he? And that's like we recognize in the music. We recognize ourselves, and I think that's kind of sometimes the value of art. I do think, as kind of going back to your comment about that the orchestra isn't actually much bigger than a Beethoven orchestra, and it'll certainly be significantly smaller than the orchestra we had on stage for last year's Korngold, Die Todesstadt. So I think, we often think of Wagner as, I think we often worry that it's this monumental sound, kind of a wall of sound coming up, and we think a lot about how exquisitely massive the proportions are. But I think there's also really beautiful moments. I've been speaking with Simon in his preparation for the role, and we think a lot, with this performance, because it's opera and concert, so our singers are so much closer to the orchestra than they usually are, and we're always thinking about balance and kind of going, do they need to be forward at this point? Can they be kind of behind the orchestra on a platform at this point? And oftentimes it's just logistics of like how big the sound of the orchestra will be. But for Simon, there are really delicious moments where the music is actually very soft and very quiet and kind of almost whispered. So there's, yes, it is a marathon, but you can kind of change the pacing as you go as well. And it's not relentless.
There are beautiful moments between Isolde and her maid that I think are very intimate.
I think, or I mean, it seems so silly. Some of the music that I love the most actually isn't, it's probably sacrilegious, isn't in fact sung by Tristan or Isolde, but you have this iconic orchestral prelude, which is divine, some of the most profound music ever composed. But then immediately afterwards, the first bit of singing you hear is by a seaman. I love that. And it's unaccompanied. Yeah. It's just his voice singing out in the town hall. And even thinking about it, I just get tingles because it's profoundly beautiful.
Yes. Feels like folk song.
And I think folk song is like it definitely makes sense for this particular piece if we think about the kind of origins of the story, which Wagner was, intensely interested in. So it's not just the monumental, it's also the very intimate, the very soft, and actually that sense of playing with scale. It's kind of one of the things I love about the score so much.
Maybe we could take that notion of the Kobe quotation that Tristan and Isolde is an opera that has brought in more innovation into opera than any other opera. It's a game changer, really.
A turning point in music history.
Absolutely, yeah. And in what way did it change the game, and how have other operas changed according to it? I think the fact of being able to make these huge demands on your singers and get the singers to work up to the expectation rather than bring the expectation down. That's part of it, I think. But I think the most important thing is to make a huge demand on the form of opera itself. Wagner hated the idea that he was writing operas. He called them music dramas. And I think what he wanted to do was to try to create a certain sense of intensity in the opera. And he certainly brought a new level of intensity, of internal intensity and extrovert singing as well. He raised everything, really, into what you could expect from an opera. And all the other operas since then have had to keep that in mind. Puccini picked up a copy of the score of Tristan and put it down straight away and said, "That's quite enough of that, thank you."
I'm not even going there. Yeah.
And I think it was the sense of the demands that this opera makes, and to have to match those demands makes it very difficult for contemporary composers.
There's a lot of composers
Yes.
who thought the same way about Beethoven and his symphonies too, that same kind of towering
Yes.
level of achievement and scale.
Well, Liszt said, after Tristan, what is left for our opera composers to do?
But I think we talk about the kind of huge influence of Wagner, and yes, there was like a huge musical influence of Wagner, but as you touched upon, Heath, like the influence was also in terms of how you can deconstruct form itself. So you might start with a paragraph, and then it becomes the focus on the sentence, and then the focus on kind of what individual words might mean, that sense of breaking everything down to the atoms themselves. And I think that was also something that Wagner was doing.
Definitely.
And we all talk about that Tristan chord at the beginning, in the sense that it's this kind of oscillation between a minor sixth and a major sixth, and so much of the universe just collapses and expands in that moment, right? It's both kind of it's kind of like the Big Bang itself. So I think it's fascinating, because the influence of Wagner just kind of can go off in any which direction. But there've been such fabulous composers of opera since Wagner. Like, you think about
certainly the musical landscape would have been
Puccini,
different without
but someone like Stravinsky, or
What is it that you hope the audience might take away from this concert experience?
Well, certainly, if they're anything like me and like the people who have written things that are like the kind of reaction I had, they will feel they're being overwhelmed by the music, they're being drawn into it. And that's a wonderful experience. So, you never get used to that. I think, too, they will be blessed by the idea that they've been touched by a work of art which they'll never forget.
I think there's something supremely human about gathering together and listening to such a profound and lengthy bit of music. There's something profoundly human about sitting there and having people sing to you. It's such for me, it's such an intensely sacred act. So I hope that people, with whatever they bring into the hall, that they feel that sense of togetherness and humanness and sacredness, I think.
Beautiful.